I was asked to do a panel, a moderated panel, and I thought really what I'm interested in is a conversation, because I've never been in a room where there aren't survivors, when there aren't people who are secret activists in their families or elsewhere, that are people who've been chewing on and thinking about these issues. So that's really what I propose for tonight, and would love if you will accept that proposition. I am surrounded by friends and people I am inspired by, and we'll have a chance to hear from each of them. And then what I'd really like to ask of each of you, if you're willing, is to let us know really why you came today. You could be having a good time at a pub down there drinking green beer. So what brought you here, or are there some questions or some issues around this that you think about, would like us to talk about, would like to be part of a conversation about? So that's really the idea, and that's why we're sitting in a circle without a table. And so if you haven't seen the pieces of art, it's worth taking a jaunt at some point. We could take a break. But it does remind us the power and passion and the issues that are involved, and that there's violence in many of our lives, in our homes, on our streets, in our communities, in this world, God knows. And one of the things that we do in this is bring it to public attention, to have us have to confront its realities, the wounds that it creates, but also start celebrating the healing. And the healing can take place through art. It can take place through action. And hopefully we have a lot of people here, and I know there are probably people out there that I don't know, but I suspect there are ways that you've contributed to this too. Let me just briefly introduce, but I'm going to give them a chance to talk more. Sharmili Majumar is the Executive Director of Rape Victim Advocates, and told me today something I didn't know, which is that she spent even more time working on domestic violence. But she's one of my heroes when I think about somebody who accomplishes more in a day than I have in a month, and with grace and with sensitivity and great thoughtfulness. It's Sharmili. So we're incredibly lucky to have her. And we have Scheherazade Tillet, who is the Executive Director of A Long Walk Home. And she and her sister have made an extraordinary art piece, a multimedia piece about rape and recovery. And it was the attack on her sister. It's very powerful. I've seen it a long time ago. So you've been doing it for a while. And they take it around the country to campuses and to high schools. And currently she's working with young women to address the issues of violence in their lives through art and through the art healing. So we'll hear more from her. And this is our most valuable player. Megan Rosado works in a shelter just steps from here. It's actually the first shelter in Chicago. It's part of, please join us. Thank you. It's called the Center for Abused Women and Children. And it used to be called CAWC, or the Greenhouse. And I actually answered their phone before they opened the shelter. That's how old I am. You opened in
77 is when the hotline was started.
Yeah, and I was part of that hotline before they got the Greenhouse started. And I've been on their board for a long time, but not now. But she was willing in 3 hours' time to come, because the other person we had asked to be here has had a medical emergency and couldn't be here. And this lovely woman with no notice showed up, and has 17 years of working in this shelter, working with women and children in a battered women's shelter. So we've got, I think, probably a combined over 100 woman years of passionate work on this, and women years are even longer than dog years. So we have a long time. So rather than sort of have a shtick, I thought what I'd prefer us to do is have a chance to hear a little bit about them. I'll introduce myself. Well, maybe should I start there and I'll pass it along? Then I'll be done. Not quite done. I've been working on this, as I've suggested, for a very long time. Really, from the late 60s to the early 70s is when I started focusing my time and energy on this. And people always ask me, well, how did you get into doing this? Which I think is code for, were you a survivor? And it is, and I am. And I was sexually abused as a child by a trusted family friend who was a very important progressive member of the Chicago community, and someone that many people esteemed, and no one knew that he had done this. And later in college, I was attacked by a knife-wielding stranger, and I thought he would kill me. A friend of mine had been murdered just weeks before, and so I felt lucky to be alive. And then again later, I was attacked by an acquaintance, someone I knew in second grade, and had no sense that there was any ill he would do to me. And I was able to fight off that attack. But honestly, it sounds, somebody who would have these multiple attacks, somebody thinks, well, something must be wrong with them, maybe they're just a victim. Well, I can tell you it was neither my fault, nor is it rare. And that one of the things that I'm incredibly and eternally grateful for is that in the late 60s, someone invited me to a living room in Hyde Park, which is where I lived, and a number of women, very few of whom I knew, sat around in what we called consciousness raising group, and we talked about our lives. And for the first time, I talked about what had happened. I never told anybody, including my loving parents, what their friend had done to me when I was 6 years old. You know, and all these stories came out. Women who were in marriages and had kids and realized that they were lesbians, and that was never talked about. We're talking at about a time, I think in 1970 or 71, Sisterhood is Powerful, which was the sort of feminist Bible, was written. There wasn't a word about rape in it. So all the things that tumbled out, incest by fathers and uncles, sexual abuse of all kinds, gender confusion and questioning and changes, none of those things were talked about. We did not have hotlines. We did not have made-for-TV movies. We did not have any public, even private discussions. We talk about a conspiracy of silence, but you don't understand, if you didn't live through it, how impossible it was to talk about these things. And something very revolutionary happened when we got to talk about who we were and what was truly our experience, and realize sometimes for the very first time that we're not only not alone, and it wasn't only our terrible nightmare, but it was actually political. That the personal really was political, that it was almost no surprise that so many women in the room had these histories and felt raw in some ways, injured by these secrets. And talking about them, realizing that it wasn't our fault, that there was a larger culture that conspired to allow this, to perpetuate it, and to silence us. And it wasn't accidental. So something very powerful started to happen then. And in these discussions, we also, slowly realized that what we understood later, these words weren't in existence. We didn't have the word battered women. That was a new concept. But we realized that it wasn't just violence of a sexual nature, it was physical, but there were also sort of institutional cultural structures that, that but allowed and maintained what was there, and that unless we looked at the issues of race and ableism, none of those words existed then. I mean, race certainly did, but racism, what we now think of as homophobia or heterosexism, assuming everybody is straight, being gay, bi, trans, queer, all of those things were deviant at that point, labeled deviant, seen as deviant, legislated against. Pardon? Illegal. Illegal. So there were revolutions begun in living rooms all over the country and over kitchen tables and in backyards. And I feel very honored to have been part of that because that really shaped what I wanted to do with my life. And I do believe that that's really where the violence against women's movement came from, was so many of us realizing that we didn't want what was happening to us and the fact that there was nowhere to go to, to silence so many people and limit so many lives. So we started talking, and I was lucky to be part of it, and I helped start some of the first rape crisis programs, helped support the creation of the shelter. I'm one of the mothers of the Chicago Metropolitan Battered Women's Network and something called the Chicago Sexual Assault Services Network, which doesn't exist anymore. Some things stay, some things go, but the issues go on. And so I was part of what was a movement, and now, 40 years later, we face incredible successes because now we have language around it, we have organizations, we have statewide coalitions, which I was involved with, national coalitions, which I was also lucky enough to be involved with. And we certainly cover it sometimes ad nauseum on talk shows and TV, not always well, sometimes in ways that are injurious and lead us backwards rather than forwards. But in many ways, the climate has changed. The problem is the violence hasn't gone away. And the problem is it's very hard to work on one piece of it without understanding the interconnectedness to all of them. So it's very hard to work on just rape and domestic violence when racism and poverty and lack of opportunity for economic security, all of these issues really impact on how we address. And I'm going to stop because I can obviously rattle on for way too long. Oh, I didn't. Did I talk about Megan?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let other people introduce themselves and ramble on a little bit, and then we're going to pass this around. And again, if you don't feel comfortable being on CAN TV, feel free to say you want to talk, but you want to be excised from it, or if it's really feels problematic for you, we can ask them to turn this off. So it's your call, and if you don't want to give us why you came and a suggestion about what to talk about, I actually believe silence, when it's chosen, is, and listening, not silence, listening is an art form, so feel free to just do that as a participant. I'm going to hand this on to Sharmili.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Barb. Such a beautiful gallery. Thank you to Art Gallery to putting this together. It's such a powerful exhibition. I definitely hope that everyone has a chance to walk around, and whether we do it through a break or later, to really take in the really powerful art that is here. I'm Sharmili Majmudar, as Barb said, and the executive director of Rape Victim Advocates.
She's the only one except for my mother that I let call me Barb.
That's my badge of honor. I'm going to put that on my resume. So in terms of, to use Barb's language, my consciousness was raised when I was in college, and I did sexual assault peer education work at the same time that I was doing HIV prevention work. And for a lot of people that seemed like very disparate things, but it was doing both pieces of the work at the same time. I was able to kind of see the connection between the two. And at the same time, I was also the editor-in-chief of our campus's literary magazine. And I think it's kind of like when you, get a new orange top, and all of a sudden you see other people wearing orange, right? You kind of you begin noticing things in a different way. And yes, that's a reference to you, Brooks. I'm going to notice all orange tops from now on. As kind of with doing the work with the literary magazine and the sexual assault peer education work and doing Take Back the Night rallies and the HIV prevention work as well, was really kind of seeing the interconnectedness of all of this. So again, riffing off what we were talking about before. And then came back to Chicago. That was in Washington, D.C. Came back to Chicago and got my graduate degree here and started doing more domestic violence work. And after graduate school, I got an MSW. And so I was doing clinical work with children and survivors of private trauma, I will say. Because a lot of the ways in which we talk about violence and trauma is about public violence. It's about street violence. That if you use the word violence, there are some, lower, okay. So when we use the word violence or when we hear the mayor talking about violence in Chicago or things like that, it really tends to be kind of shorthand for gang violence and shootings and maybe drug-related violence. All of which, of course, are important for us to be looking at. But I think there's a lot of private violence, inside violence that happens that is more along the lines of the work that I was doing at that point, which was I did some specialized work with children birth to 6 and their exposure to violence, and then just overall work with children and adults. And then from there, just continued to do domestic violence work. I worked with an organization called Sarah's Inn, which works with West Side communities as well as the western suburbs, and then came on to RVA about 6 years ago. And in all of that, I feel one of the currently dormant chapters of my life is also that I'm a spoken word artist. And that also kind of, I worked with a group that no longer exists, but a Pan-Asian multidisciplinary group called Mango Tribe. And when we came together to do our first production, it was called Sisters in the Smoke, it was very clear that that experience of private violence was so much of a common thread through our experience, whether that be anti-immigrant sentiment and xenophobia, whether that was through eating disorders, whether that was through being children who witnessed domestic violence, whether that was through the experience of sexual assault. But it was the conceit of Sisters in the Smoke really allowed for us to kind of see this as common thread. When so often those are seen as very separate kind of issues as well. And then we went on to, for many years, do work across the country, traveled as an ensemble, doing all sorts of multimedia work as well. So now at RVA, I'll just say a little bit about RVA because I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about our organizations. But RVA is a comprehensive rape crisis center that is based in Chicago. We've been around since 1974. We were all volunteer in those days, much like what we were talking about, that there weren't hotlines, or it was a group of people who came together and saw that there was a need for a better and more informed and more compassionate response to survivors of sexual violence as they came into emergency rooms and hospitals. So from those the humble but powerful beginnings, we now provide 24-hour crisis response to 14 hospitals across the city. That brings us to providing crisis response to anywhere from 5 to 550 survivors every year in emergency rooms. And on top of that, we also provide counseling services, legal and medical advocacy. We do prevention education, professional training, et cetera. And through all of that, annually we serve over 1,700 survivors of sexual violence and their loved ones in the greater Chicago metropolitan area. Just as a point of reference, in terms of like how that matches up to incidents, of sexual violence. The most recent kind of national study that was done said that it was around somewhere between 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 women will be a survivor of sexual violence in their lifetime in Illinois. So that's Illinois specific. And at the same time, like the Illinois State Police have less than 9,000 sexual assaults that are reported across the state to law enforcement every year. So we know that there's a great deal of disparity there, and that a lot of our work, therefore, really needs to be around creating cultures that are intolerant of sexual violence. So microcultures like schools and macroculture are like our entire culture, rather than simply or only looking at the criminal justice system to address the issue of sexual violence, which often, of course, is also after the fact as well. So that's a little bit about my journey in RVA, and I'll pass it on to Scheherazade.
It's wonderful hearing their stories. I know these women, but I sometimes don't know the stories of how they got to the places they are at. So it's really nice to hear. My voice is low. I'm fighting bronchitis, and so I couldn't not be here with you guys today. So this is the only thing I did today, is be here today, besides rest for this. So yeah, this is so much better than it was yesterday. So, so bear with me when you ask questions. And I'm just actually really, it's really nice to have a circle. I'm just kind of pausing for a second and reflecting back. Like I do a lot of public talks at colleges where people are in the audience and you're running around with the mic. And so it's nice to like actually be one with your audience and hear your story. So I'm so curious to hear your voices too. So my name is Scheherazade, and I'll just kind of go through my history in the movement. I began in the movement. What led me into the movement was in 1983, when my mom was sexually assaulted when I was 5 years old by a stranger in our neighborhood, walking home a block away from our apartment. And I say that is like the beginning, because that began so much what I ended up doing with my life. In her process of healing, she sent me and my sister to live with my dad in Trinidad and Tobago as part of her healing process. And so at a very young age, I knew not only what sexual assault was, but the impact it had. And not just on the person, but the ripple effects it has on a community and the family. And so it's something that we didn't talk about, you know. My mom, you know, where she was at with her process was she was able to incarcerate the person. The person actually went on, was a serial rapist. But she was able to incarcerate him. And she thought we were only going to be in Trinidad for like 6 months, but it ended up being like 4 years. So we went back and forth between Trinidad and the United States for 4 years. And so, you know, Trinidad was an amazing place, but I knew, like, everything I knew changed after that. Like, you know, culture, and I've never been in Trinidad before. I never was raised predominantly with my dad before. All these things that I knew shifted because of someone else's act upon them. And then I think I really realized what healing looked like after that. So I fast forward from 83 to 1997, when I was a sophomore in college, when my sister, my older sister, same sister, disclosed to me that she was a sexual assault survivor in college. And so I was the first family member that she told the story to. It was 5 years after her incidents of sexual assault took place. She was sexually assaulted in college, and she was a multiple survivor. And I really, you know, as a sister, as a person, I was sad and angry, and all these like different emotions ran through me. But ultimately, I just wanted to be there for her in a different kind of space that I couldn't be as a child for my mom. And, I got the first time to live with my sister that summer, and I really got to see the impact that it had on her in a different kind of way than like it had in my mom. My sister also had, I think, like thinking about she had more resources. She wasn't a single mom. Her education brought her to more resources to get help about her sexual violence. And so ultimately, she used her story to become an advocate and activism. And I was witnessing all this summer that I lived with her, seeing her publish her story, her testimony. But also I saw the good and bad, right? So I saw this beautiful journey. I saw what healing looks like, and her trying to put together the pieces, and then like unfortunately her putting together the pieces, And so, again, as a significant other, I didn't know what exactly. I don't know. The mic is good. Okay. I didn't know what to do, like so many people, but I knew I wanted to do something. And I didn't know if she wanted to talk about it, if she didn't. So I began taking photography classes in college, and I was a psych major, child development major actually. And I went and I asked her if I could photograph her healing process. And that moment, that journey, just changed our lives completely. I basically used my camera to enter spaces that I couldn't talk to her verbally about. And this is what's so amazing about this exhibition, because there weren't things like this when I began my project. When I began my project, I actually had to look at cancer survivors and HIV work to inform the photography project, because visually in the movement, we were, even when we progressed so much, but we were very much still at keeping identities closed of survivors. And there weren't so many facial photography projects, which is, I think, one of the biggest transformations that I've seen in the movement. And so I looked at that. I also definitely didn't see Black women's stories. So I didn't know that was going to be adding to this. I thought these things existed. And so I was just doing a project as an art therapy project, or helping my sister in honoring what healing looks like, instead of silencing the journeys that so many people go through, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's trauma, or whether it's death, or, what does healing look like? And so me and my sister decided to open this photography project to the public, and then we transform it into a multimedia performance, which she spoke about earlier, which the photographs are used in terms of music and dance and photography to look at the healing process. And so that's the beginning of A Long Walk Home. That was in 2000. We officially became a nonprofit in 2003. So we're going on our 11th year. What brought me to Chicago, I applied to the School of the Art Institute and got my master's degree in art therapy in 2005, and worked at the YWCA for about 10 years. I don't know, something like that. At the YWCA in North Lawndale as an art therapist, as I was working with A Long Walk Home. And then about 3.5 years ago, I worked as executive director full-time at A Long Walk Home. And we started a program here with adolescent girls, which I think is the heart of the movement. The reach that you can get with an adolescent girl is tremendous, but they're also the most forgotten community. And we decided to work with, I think, what I think is a very invisible community, Black young girls in working class communities, and focus and make them, instead of just giving them treatment, but make them the leaders for this movement, right? So give them the tools that I have learned along the way, and youth leadership and treatment and whatever it takes to actually become a leader about this. Yep, and so that's my story.
Welcome to everybody coming in. Hi, Camelia. Hi.
Yeah, there's so much to say. And so much that you all have already covered, and I do want to kind of keep this brief at this point now so that we can go ahead and move on as we've got more people coming in, which is fabulous. So thank you all for being here as well, and thanks for creating this space. I'm very, very curious as I'm hearing all your stories to hear what everyone else has to say. So I'm Megan Rosado, and I'm the Direct Service Volunteer and Education Coordinator at CAWC, which is Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. And as Barbara mentioned, we were the first domestic violence agency in Chicago, and started when a group of women and survivors got together, very much the way that you were describing, and decided that they wanted to address the issue of domestic violence. And so by learning from each other and having opportunities to experience, to put their own experiences into a context and figure out for themselves what was helpful, what was not helpful, what is helpful to other people coming in, they were able to start this movement and create a great deal of change. First, initially, just by themselves, just providing support and opening hotline services, and then offering a safe place for women and children to go. So Greenhouse Shelter is one of our programs, and that was started in 1979. And then developing more legislative advocacy, a lot of education and outreach into the community, and building allies. And making change that way. And so now today we have a few other programs. The shelter is still our largest project to date, but we also have the Hospital Crisis Intervention Project, which is located in Stroger Hospital of Cook County. So we have advocates that provide training and technical expertise to the medical staff on how to identify and appropriately respond to victims, and then they also see survivors that are coming through the medical setting. We've expanded that project now. We have a new collaboration that we're starting this year with Northwestern Hospital. So we're very happy about that. And then we also have an outreach and walk-in program in Humboldt Park. It's called the Humboldt Park Outreach Program. So that is our agency. Obviously, we've had a history of having all different kinds of organizing projects as different things were going on in time, and some of that is stuff that's done short term because you're hoping that maybe then a community will take it over, or you're working with the system and maybe then they see the value in it and take over the work that you're doing, and then some things that we just had to continue to keep doing on our own. How I got involved in this work, there's lots of different points of entry that you can talk about, that I can talk about. But I'll start at the very beginning. It was probably about between the ages of 2 and 5. My parents were very involved in many different social movements, but specifically in the 70s, it was the Equal Rights Amendment and trying to get that passed. So from a very, very early age, I was going on marches downtown and, had chants going in my head. My older brother had his favorite chant, which then he was able, because he was a little bit older, was able to keep with me. So it was out of the kitchen and into the streets, the ERA cannot be beat. So if that's what I was doing at the age of 2, definitely there's other stories I can tell in my life that had me come back around to not just the women's movement, but just issues of violence and oppression and different communities. Eventually, it led me to study community organizing, which is why I think that my current position as the Volunteer and Education Coordinator is such a great fit, because I'm working with community members and a lot of survivors, but not all survivors, and really providing comprehensive training, another space. Anyone who's going to work with victims needs to go through a 40-hour training in domestic violence, so really providing this space for an opportunity to really look at the cross-section analysis of all these issues, and then have a good firm basis for wanting to go and help people, or help themselves. So It's a pleasure and an honor to do the work that I do, and specifically to work with so many community members, and then to participate in events like this as well.
Thank you. Well, what I'd like to do, welcome people who came in later. I'll reiterate that what we wanted to do, because we've got a lot of experience up here, but I know there's a lot of experience out there and hopefully lots of questions. So we wanted to really tailor this to what you were interested in hearing about. And so I want to pass this around, and if you're willing, you can tell us your name and why you came, or if there's something that you would like to see us discuss, because honestly, all of us could talk at you for a week. We won't, we promise, we have a bolt at the door. You can leave whenever you want. And if you don't want to participate, just pass it on.
Well, my name is Sherry Reif Naselli, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I was in a verbally abusive relationship for 30 years, and my graduate thesis, when I got accepted to the Art Institute, I had to shift my focus from being sort of a childlike teenager that was able to clean the house and take care of the kids and perform and have sex, and but I wasn't, and drive and, you know, do all of that, but I wasn't supposed to think, and I wasn't supposed to talk at certain times or ask questions or challenge, or, you know, challenge my husband's authority. And and not to say that there weren't good times, which is also what makes this whole dynamic, especially with intimacy, when you're in an intimate relationship with someone where it's not an invader, you know. And so for me, when I went to grad school, I had to, my work had, prior to going to grad school, had been about this situation and how I felt. And but when I went to grad school, I started thinking about how did I get from being a graduate, you know, from an undergraduate school and feeling like I had the world by the string, to hiding behind the bed, you know, and walking around the house with my hands curled up under my chin most of the time, you know, or not, but a lot of the time. When the door would open, it was like, oh, what kind of a mood is he in now? So for me, I started investigating how we use language intimately, and how that language, you know, someone said to me once, well, you know, you hurt the ones you love the most, and it's like, well, why is that okay? You know, who said that was all right? And so I started recording conversations with my husband, and I kind of laid out a message that, you know, anything and everything that's said in the house is up for grabs. So you have your warning, you know. And so I then transcribed some of those conversations, and that was my graduate thesis. And it was about, my thesis was about how language, spoken language specifically, even though it's invisible and intangible, has this power to shift and change reality. So that was kind of my investigation. And through the process of going to graduate school, I also got divorced, and, you know, so it was, you know, it's been an interesting process. So, yeah.
I just want to say we're honored if you want to talk about your life. It isn't necessary that you do, so feel free to say your name and what you're interested in, or tell us as much as you want, but I don't want that to be a prerequisite. That's not what that's not what we intended, but it's very powerful, and I can tell that must be your piece.
No, actually, my piece is the audio. They're audios, yeah, and I'll turn them on later, but we didn't want the background, but yeah. One of the things with verbal abuse is that there's no evidence of this language when it has been spoken, except in the psyche of the two people who heard the conversation. And when one of those people is saying, I didn't say that, you know, you're crazy. What are you talking about? You're the one that's nuts. You're the one seeing the therapist. You know, that kind of shift in reality where, you know, it's like the sky is blue. No, the sky is purple, you know, or sky is green. And you're nuts if you think it's blue. You know, so it's this whole shift in your reality, or that's what I experienced. So that's, you know, and the invisibility of that. There's no marks on you, there's no bruises, but it's all in your head, you know. So anyway, crazy making, one might say. So yeah.
Okay, my name is Granita Meat, and I had the honor and the pleasure to come with this idea to ASC. I'm an ASC member, and first of all, thank you so much, Barbara, and you lady, and you, Sherry, my love. You gave such, immediately, you created such a true and safe environment, and I really, really thank you for that. I also want to thank ASC that always support my ideas. Willing to paint the gallery in black if needed.
There's such good ideas, Grenade.
Thank you. And I want to mention my friend Miriam Rashid, which is actually the one that organized this event here. And thank you so much. Barbara is our friend, mutual friend, for being here for us and bringing your wonderful Amazons with you. I'm a therapist. I'm also an artist, and I worked with women in a domestic violence shelter. I worked with the women previously incarcerated. A lot of issues of sexual assault was raised and needed attention and love and healing. And I thought, I'm a therapist, so I'm safe. And I was not. And it took time to heal. I'm still healing. And I came with this idea, we need to talk. We need to have the stories out. And we need to do that if possible, but this is my journey, without demonizing men and with a true, I mean, this is my journey, with a true wish and hope of healing. But the story needs to be heard with integrity, and I hope, you know, we did that. I also want to really thank the women that we worked with in a shelter of domestic violence, and we created some pieces here. And I think that it would be a wonderful idea to have a short break so we can look at the space, understand the space that we are having this conversation. They're not here in body, but they're very much here, they and their children. Thank you. I would like to have some question of feedbacks about the aftermath that you started to talk of violence or crisis, of how it is affecting the family. Okay, so yeah.
Hi, I'm Inbala Meet, her daughter. Yeah, that's me. So I've had a very sort of strange and undefinable relationship with violence and boundaries being crossed over the years. And I don't have exact words for it. I don't have a label for it. And I think that's maybe something that it should be talked about, like, you know, that there's the fact that it's not necessarily, you're not necessarily able to put your experience in words, and how that silences you because you aren't able to express yourself. So I'm here because my mom, well, you know, and but you know, also I wanted to sort of be able to process this, my experiences, like, you know, I wasn't able to verbally express this, but to artistically express it in an open environment, in an accepting environment, in an environment where people didn't need me to explain, but they kind of knew, they kind of understood where I was coming from. And I think so, another issue maybe that could be talked about is sort of this, I guess, sense of exclusiveness with topics such as domestic violence or violence against women, because I guess a lot of people feel excluded from the conversation because they haven't literally experienced it in their life. You know, they haven't been hit before. They haven't seen, you know, it in their house. And, you know, I think it's really important for everyone to be in this conversation, because it really, first of all, so many people are affected, and you probably know someone that's affected. Chances are you do. But even beyond the statistics, I think, you know, this violence against women is such a, it's such a broad thing. It's such a, it's everywhere. It's from, you know, the mindset that women feel like they have to, you know, hug themselves while they walk tightly, you know, in a dark alley, that they can't feel safe, you know, like just safety, like the lack of safety that we feel every day, you know, media, like, you know, where our bodies are objectified, we're, you know, taken apart, and, you know, this is violence. It's not, you know, even if you haven't been physically hit or sexually assaulted, like really, this conversation is is very broad, and should really include everyone, and everyone has a say in it, and everyone has something valuable to contribute to it. And yeah, I guess that's
Thank you. My name is Camelia Aude, and
You can talk loud for those of us who are aging.
my name is Camelia Aude, and I'm really grateful to Grenade for convening this and doing a lot of other things that have affected so many people's lives in such a great way. I guess I'm one of her mentees. I'm now at the Kovler Center, and I'm volunteering there and working with women who are survivors of torture and trauma and other things. And I also work in the Arab American and Muslim community. And I came tonight because I feel I want to be I want the communities that I'm working with and myself to be part of a broader discussion, and also part of looking at this through the intersection, connecting with all the other issues that are affecting us in terms of violence that affects women, our communities, and families.
Hello, my name is Jalon Trice. I'm a student at who studies criminology, race, and gender right now, and I came here today because I am seeking like new viewpoints about violence against women, and I'm currently on my way into becoming a law student, specifically who helps domestic victims and securing better victims' rights inside the courtroom. The current legal procedure right now for most victims is that once they enter the courtroom or the criminal justice system, it seems as that they're almost excluded from the proceedings. And in order for the victims to get the justice that they should, they need to be involved more. And this is something that artwork like this and spaces like this help me to see that future for those people.
Hi, I'm Miriam, and gosh, I've been interested in like women's issues for so long. I'm not sure where to start, but you know, I grew up seeing a lot of women battered. I mean, I saw a lot of battered women, and also they seemed trapped to me. I never saw any one of them leave, and I wanted to understand. I wanted, you know, in college I took a women's, I can't remember what it's called, but you know, an introduction to feminism or women's rights, but I couldn't relate to the professor at all. Like, I thought she was politically not very progressive on issues that I cared about, and a lot of the things she said I just couldn't relate to, and I never knew exactly where to plug in. But I worked on a lot of issues to deal with, like dealing with violence and oppression in other ways. So it's always been a personal interest, but I've never plugged in. And so I've been, like every time Barbara has talked about the work she's done with women's rights issues or the laws, that she helped draft, my antennas go up and I want so much to learn so much more. So this is actually the first event I've been to where this is actually the central topic of discussion. So I'm excited, to kind of build a foundation. I've read, some books and things like that, but I've never really engaged. So this is an exciting opportunity.
Hi, my name is Michael Bahu, and Miriam invited me to come. I feel for women. All my heart is extended to all the women who are abused, especially in the country where I grew up, that area where there's a lot of violence against women that comes also through religion and other aspects of society. I pray for them, and I can't wait till they break their shackles and start. It's their turn to rule. My hopes are for that. All women in the world be liberated. And that's all I have to say.
My name is Rachel Rubin. I'm a physician, and I have, throughout my career and prior, have certainly been confronted with victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, violence against women, and have always felt angry about it. I remember my college boyfriend used to go out in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning and take a walk. If he couldn't sleep or he was wanting to just take a walk, and I felt very angry at him that he had the privilege to be able to do that, and I couldn't do it because I was afraid. I never felt that I could go out walking safe, even in a college town. And I think that I've been trying to use that anger to sort of drive me to fight for change, not only for women's rights, and to stop violence against women, but of course against everybody. And the stories that we've heard already this evening are so poignant and difficult and important to listen to and to help as part of a catharsis. But I don't think that, and I don't think anybody here thinks that that's really enough. And I would like to have a bit more of a discussion, and various people have brought this up, but to talk about the societal and systemic imperatives in this country and actually internationally that maintain this violence, particularly sexual violence and domestic violence against women. It's fine to be a witness and to talk about one's experiences, because I do think that that's very important, but to also figure out, give me ways, or collectively figure out ways that we can be stronger and better in forcing societal change to prevent this from happening in the future. And laws have changed, certainly from the time I was a kid till now. The laws have strengthened. It's no longer immediately thought that the rape victim is at fault, but there's still elements of that. So that's only one aspect within sort of the legal system where things can change. But I wanted to talk about, or see if people had ideas within other realms of society to understand the societal imperatives that maintain this level of violence.
Hi, my name is Sue Avila, and I'm a nurse, and I came to see all this wonderful art and to hear what people had to say and to learn. Thank you.
When I was aware of an acquaintance who was subjected to domestic violence, a statistic came up. Somebody offered up a statistic saying something to the effect that regardless of income, education, religion, nationality, I don't know what it was, that domestic violence was what this conversation was about. Domestic violence is pretty much the same proportion across all of these groups: economic, educational, appearance. And I just wondered if you have any information on that.
Hi, I'm one of the artists of a member of ARC, and I created a piece that you can see in the small gallery. We, under Granit Amit, we went a group of 6 women, and we met with a counterpart of 6 domestic violence victims at the shelter, and we were paired to have a discussion and to produce a piece of artwork of hope and healing. And this experience was really earth-shattering. Not that I haven't heard about it, and not that I haven't seen some people or heard about it, but the depth of the pain and the chaos in women and children's lives was very dark for me. I mean, and the piece that I created was for the woman, with the woman, and I really hope that they're all going to be okay after they leave the shelter. Anyway, watch the art. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, okay. I'm just going to hold this. Hi. My name is Malvika Jolly. I'm also a friend of Inbal's. Actually, I think this is my first or second time in this gallery space, so I'm very excited to be here. I was raised in a house that had a lot of domestic violence for about, I would say about 20 to 25 years now. I'm about 20. I am 20. Yeah.
Do you have anything you'd like?
I was wondering if I could just like raise some questions that I would like to be picked up at some point. I was really interested in what Alice was raising about sort of the ethics of disappearing memory or erasing memory, even when it comes up outside of maybe verbal abuse or domestic abuse or physical abuse. Because I was recently, I've been spending a lot of time with my father for the past few months, and I've been seeing him in a lot of different contexts that are free of my mother, and have recently seen him and the way that he interacts with his own parents and with other elderly people, and there's this strange dynamic. When I see my father, who's a very responsible, very professional, very caring doctor, but deeply unethical doctor, interact with his own parents, who both, have had dementia, and the strange, discomforting ease that we can have with sort of like removing people's memories or denying people's memories almost, and how that has a lot of strange parallels for me, especially with the way that my father has, for most of my life, behaved toward my mother's narratives. So that's one thing. I also, I can't remember where, I think you raised this actually just a minute ago, but I'm interested in, I guess, you raised the question about how outside of like cultural and national and socioeconomic like levels, generally domestic abuse tends to be equal in all of these different groups, and I wanted to bring up, I don't know, this strange phenomenon that happens, which is, I guess, the desire to have awareness that there is a problem, but then also the desire to like not, I'm Indian and Pakistani, and there are a lot of cultural stereotypes about Indian and Pakistani and generally like South Asian cultures and people being deeply violent toward women, and so there's this strange dynamic in, I guess, like the groups of Indian immigrants who live on the South Side that have become my adopted family. There's this strange dynamic of, well, that we know that something really highly irregular is happening, and how much do we interfere, but how much do we keep it very, very private, like don't let it get out, but only tell the Indian people. because other people will find it deeply, deeply problematic, and we know that this is something to be kind of normalized, and what happens when all the Indian people in your neighborhood know and think it's really freaky, what happens then? So this like strange desire to sort of keep the things that are not only within your family but within your culture deeply private, to sort of slip under the radar of, like, you know, to sort of deny a cultural stereotype, and what happens when your cultural stereotype is really, really true. Sort of that. Also, the comment that you had made I found really, really, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Sherry. Sherry, you're so lovely. I found the comment you made about being at one moment a graduate student with the whole world on a string and then being like a cowering teenage child really compelling, because on one hand, my mother is, and this is getting a little bit personal, I'm sorry, but my mother is the best educated person I know. She's really very impressive. She's really very lovely, but so much of the, I guess, logic of her household, really, so much of the logic of her household and like the sort of reality of her household completely negates her presence, and completely like you know the way that in like sort of like totalitarian societies, certain people can be disappeared, like actively disappeared, like people in, you know, Argentina in the 70s or something, you know, they're disappeared, they're gone, and it's an active, it's not that they got lost, it's that it's this very active process, they're just gone. They have been disappeared by someone else. And there's a logic and a sort of like fabricated reality to the household that my mother lives in that completely negates her presence and completely negates her, like, you know, really fabulous education, and completely negates her career. And I guess the strange dynamic of, I don't know, this extends, it sort of ripples out of my mother as well. It's kind of creepy. So those three things I would be interested in knowing a bit more about. For you.
My name is Janet Sirkin. I'm a friend of Granit's, and despite the fact that I really, really thought, oh, I don't want to go, I thought I should come, and I'm very glad I did. And I have a background in law and in art, and so I think the easier thing to do is to say, well, from a legal point of view or from an artistic point of view, this is very interesting. But I think from a personal point of view, it's the most interesting, because you can relate on any level you wish, but that in fact, I think all people have the fear of violence, but I think when it's in your family structure and you're betrayed in this way, it's particularly damaging, not just to the primary participants, but to everyone around it. And I think that I'm fascinated in a kind of a very sad way that this is not something in the past, this is now. And so I've done various things where I'm a very good listener, and so I've been a very good listener in various parts of my professional and personal life. So I thought that I would come and listen some more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Gibson, and short, I know Along Lock Home, and I know RVA. I just have two specific questions that I'd like to address. The first is, since we're in a gallery, I'd really like us to talk about the art, and I'd like us to talk about the process from the artists, the process of working with the women who, these are their voices, who are being facilitated through your craft and through the art. So I really want to talk about the art. And I also want to talk about who's not in this space. I have spent a lot of time working on the West Side, and without going into the long details of how I got there, I just want to say that how do we include those voices in spaces like this? How do we allow them to create these sorts of spaces in their own neighborhoods, in their own environment, so that there is more voice? And those are my questions.
Hi, my name is Siobhan. I'm going to be listening. Hi, my name is Monica. I'm a member of ARC Gallery, and I'm happy to be here to witness and listen to this conversation. As Granit's daughter was saying, I don't remember your name, but if it, it affects one woman, it affects all of us in some way, shape, or form.
I'm Brooks, and I guess my question is about the future of the movement of gender-based violence or prevention thereof. I find that, our, what am I thinking, like the penal system isn't always the best route to healing. Sometimes when that person is removed from families and communities, it creates more harm. And so I'm interested in what a vision of the future looks like that's going to make a world that we all want to live in. So.
My name's Judy Kempa, and I'm an artist. And when I came to see the show here, I just was really moved by the different pieces. And, I'm student of people for as long as I can remember. And, the differences between men and women, what men get to have and women don't, and then what happens to women that doesn't happen to men. So that's always been part of, my parts. So I came tonight to learn more so that I can constructively do more and, offer or participate in healing.
Hi, my name's Carly Tsuda. I'm a student. One thing that I would like us to talk about, I really appreciated when you said that domestic abuse is part of our culture, because I feel like conversations about domestic abuse so often skip to the end where we're taking care of victims, and that's really important and that's really crucial, and survivors deserve to be taken care of to the fullest extent. I think it's really important though that we go back to how did this culture happen? How did we get to this place? And how can we change things so that we have to care for fewer survivors?
Hi, my name is Jill Rodriguez, and my friend Miklos did the two little sculptures behind the camera over there. So that's how I learned about the exhibit. I really wanted to just be present and listen to everything people had to say, so I'm not really sure what's going to come out. I am a exercise and weight loss specialist, and I've been doing this for about 25 years. Over the years, developing my coaching skills, it had to become less about, the way people look and more about their health. But what I've discovered through, creating a series of coaching questions is oftentimes I'm getting to deeper issues, and a lot of times it's because of violence, that women are not taking care of themselves, their bodies, or don't feel that they're deserving. So really, I came here to find out, what you guys do, and I don't know, see if there's some way to either weave it into what I'm doing. It's a little bit, all about me, but about them as well. So you're just knowing what the options are out there for people that I meet, possibly even a way to weave it into my profession, or possibly even change my profession, because I feel very passionate about this.
Hi, my name is Leo Gideon. I'm, I guess, retired at this point, but I do enjoy and appreciate arts in its various forms, may it be, visual or music and such. And what really impressed me in this particular, should we say, installation is the reference to beyond the personal to some degree, using that quote from Ezekiel and reference on the other side, how women and in Greek mythology, have been treated. Obviously in this country, a woman at 77%, is demonized, in one form or another, including the audio part of individual stories, I think is so powerful, and to top it all off, allowing a board for individuals as they pass through to express their view, their moment. Particularly, there's one here, that's right above you. I didn't escape the moments, but I escaped the mentality, and now I'm free. That is so significant in our lives, And we talk about this country being multicultural, and we can't forget that so many elements that are societally cloistered, in different cultures. I've learned, I've done some volunteer and ESL work, and you have families from other cultures that are coming here, and you realize that, the husband and the sons, and they're all educated, yet the women are illiterate, they're insignificant, they're not part, they're part to do the work, but they're not part of the society. So you question, in what other ways are they minimized, as a human.
Hi, my name is Pauline. I'm a member of the gallery, and I was involved I'm one of the artists that was involved in working with the women from the shelter, and we have a piece in the room back here. But I really wanted to say a couple of things. One is about education, and somebody else mentioned it before, but I think education is really, really one of the ways to move things forward. I had a conversation with my 10-year-old grandson about this show recently, and he said, "Oh, you mean like bullying?" And I said, "Yes, like bullying. It's inappropriate, it's wrong." And so we talked about that, and I thought that was a really great opportunity to talk to him about how men treat women and how boys treat each other and treat young girls as well. I also wanted to reiterate that I think that violence is broad-ranging. It's not only physical, it's mental, it's verbal. Words, Sherry and I have had this conversation before, words are extremely important in how they're used. But finally, I wanted to ask about something that is close to me, is how, as a child, your parents have been abused and don't talk about it, and what that does to the children, and how children are raised by parents who have been abused or have gone through violence of some kind and horrific experiences. And it really affects the way their children are being raised. And your story about the openness between you and your mother is wonderful, because it's so rare. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's a really important aspect of violence and abuse that doesn't really, and I'm not just talking about young children, even adult children, everybody gets affected in different ways by what happens. So I just wanted to mention that and bring that up.
Hi, my name is Nancy Fritz. I'm also a gallery member here. I've been fortunate, I think, to not have been the focus of very much violence in my life, but I am a pediatrician and I take care of mostly teenagers. My patients are teenagers on the south side of Chicago. So I've worked with a lot of young women who've experienced various sorts of violence, sexual, physical, and just the everyday verbal hatefulness that people do to each other. I'm struck by how little resources there are for young women who don't have good insurance to help them heal. And that's one of the frustrations of my professional life. I'm also struck by how it's not just the women who are being violated. There's maybe even more violence to young men. And because they are the victims of violence, they take it out on the people around them and the women in their lives. So we're not going to address violence against women until we address violence against men as well. And so I'm wondering how we can do that, how we can take this, the medical system that we work with that doesn't provide mental health services in sufficient quality for both men and women who are trying to heal themselves, and do something with that.
I want to thank everybody for these very thoughtful comments, these very hard and fascinating questions. And I've been trying to scribble down as many as I can, because there's so many ways that we can go. But I'll just pick one of them that I felt came up a number of times. And some of you talked, I think, Mbali, you talked about what I think of as rape culture, that we live in a culture that, encourages this, that everything on TV, that the advertising of women, that the, and that ties in, subtly or not so subtly, racism and xenophobia. But I'm going to hand, I could talk a lot, but I'm going to hand this off to Sharmili, because one of the things that I think, you talked about the exclusion from this issue a little bit. I think I think men and women alike live in this rape culture. We all have imbibed this idea that masculinity means dominance, means always being in control, feeling tough and capable. And we've challenged some of the ideas of femininity. There are many more strong and curvy and different shaped people, but we haven't really embraced a sense of equality, and many of us live with a daily sense of dread, even if we haven't been victimized. There's always the possibility. You can't go out at 2 o'clock at night like your partner because it wouldn't be safe. And then there are those insidious messages that get sent through all the medium. I don't know if you have friends or young people in your lives that play those games, but I remember at one point there was a video game in which there was an Indian woman, Native American woman, tied to a post, and the little, your little avatar, whatever that was supposed to rape her. There was a huge outcry. This was a couple years ago, and there was a huge outcry, and we got it taken off. We got the company embarrassed, and they pulled it off. But those kinds of things, the sort of perpetuation and encouragement of violence, and then who we see as violent. We've demonized black and brown men, absolutely, in this culture. And you look at, one of the things that faces all of us who work on violence and have seen the criminal justice system as a panacea have realized that it too can victimize. It can make the victim feel guilty and on trial. What was she wearing? Why was she out? Why didn't she outcry immediately? But we also demonize the person who's harmed. And many communities don't want to use the police because the police haven't been seen as supportive. And so there's a larger question afoot about restorative justice. Are there ways that communities can look at this? Maybe not the most heinous cases, maybe people who are repeat offenders. There's no safe place other than prison. But shy of that, when they're young men who are beginning to act out and believe that they're supposed to be aggressive, that when a woman says no, she's just being coy, or when a girl says no, she's just trying to be attractive. How do we get to those young men to change their minds, to have them respect and understand the impact of what they think might have just been a slightly coercive or maybe showing that they were true guys, and instead end up deeply harming not just that victim, but as we've talked about, family members, community members. Those ripples of impact continue. So there's the issue of rape culture. There's the issue of how might we look at other methods of addressing violence. There's, let's see, impact of children. You've worked a lot with children. So I'm going to hand it around and then keep throwing out questions.
Oh, boy. So I'm a mother. I have almost 3.5-year-old. And it's probably attuned me in a different way to thinking about kind of what children consume. And there was a story going around on Facebook today, I think, about what do Disney movies teach boys about masculinity. There's been a little bit more focus in more recent years about what girls take away from representations of femininity. There's certainly been a focus on Disney in particular, but also kind of in Lego and having Lego friends and a variety of different kind of ways in which we think about what do children interact with kind of from a somewhat consumerist perspective, and what does that teach them? But what I found frustrating about that is that it tends to think of children as only learning things about themselves. So if we only ask, what do Disney movies teach boys about masculinity? I feel like we're missing a pretty large piece of the conversation, which is, what do Disney movies teach boys about femininity, right? And so what do Disney movies teach girls about masculinity? It's not just about kind of the particular identification and kind of what small gender box we construct for girls, boys. And I really do think that idea of talking about gender and gender as a social construct is really central to kind of this conversation about rape culture. Because when you think about, our earlier question or point raised was about, across cultures, across economic backgrounds, what does gender-based violence look like? So probably the only really recent global statistic we have is that 1 in 3 women across the globe will be raped, beaten, or exploited in her lifetime. That's a statistic that comes from the United Nations. So that's 1 in 3, and that's not specific to sexual violence or domestic violence, but across kind of different types of violence experienced by women. But I think there can be this tendency to go to this place of, well, our women have it better than their women. So we create this kind of hierarchy of our sexism is gentler than your sexism, and our rape is gentler than your rape, right? So when it posited that way, of course, it sounds a little ridiculous that we would try to create a hierarchy of rape. But that is what we do. We tend, particularly I think in the US, but also kind of in from the Western gaze, tend to see countries that are part of the global South or part of what is called the third world as backwards, as less than, as being particularly misogynist in a way that we are kind of elevated from in some way. And the reality is that, at least in my belief, no rape is better than another rape. And rape continues to occur in the US, and yes, it continues to occur all over the world. And in some ways it can seem particularly brutal or particularly supported by the community. But you also have to remember this 10-year-old girl in Cleveland, Texas was gang raped repeatedly. And when interviewed about that, the community around her was talking about how she was dressed, a 10-year-old, in the US in the last 5 years. So I think sometimes that when we talk about kind of cultural underpinnings, probably the deepest cultural underpinning is patriarchy. And that is kind of one of the things that really kind of holds all of what we're talking about together. And that if we don't directly address that, we're really only addressing kind of the shapes and colors of that patriarchy and the shapes and colors of that violence. I understand why it happens. I
think there's a way in which we want to feel like we're safer than someone else. You know, it's the same mentality, I think, that goes behind what we call the good girl checklist, which are the 10 things that if you do this, you will not be raped, right? So don't wear a ponytail, don't go out at night, don't, you know, walk into your car without checking underneath in the back seat, making sure, like, make sure you have your keys between your knuckles, don't go out by yourself, you know, never get drunk, don't go with someone who you don't know. You know, all of these, like, rules that when we do our rape prevention work in classes, you know, we'll say, okay, you know, and, you know, we use binary gender, so I want to acknowledge that, but we'll ask a group of boys, like, what is it that you've learned to keep yourself safe from sexual violence? And there's generally silence, like pin drop silence, right? And they'll ask the girls, what have you learned to make yourself safe from sexual violence? And they will list millions of things. They've gone to self-defense class, you know, they've had their pastor at their church tell them how they have to dress modestly, because if they don't, that's going to invite, you know, impure thoughts or impure actions. So there's already, like, in such insidious and early ways, there are things that we are told about who is responsible for sexual violence, who causes it. And so I think rape culture, you can get focused very much on the media, and that's important. But rape culture is part of our water. Like, it's much more everyday. And then I think we would like to believe. I think it's everything from boys will be boys to man up, to telling girls that they need to not dress like sluts, to having ideas of dress codes that are based off of how they might distract boys. You know, like girls can't wear leggings because they're too distracting. Who are they too distracting to? Well, they're too distracting to boys. What message are we sending in that very simple, admonition? What are we saying about boys and who they are and what they are subject to? Like, that they don't have minds, right? That they are simply reactive. And that girls are the provocateurs. So I think that when we're talking about rape culture, we're really very much talking about who we say gets to be agents of themselves and their lives. And in being agents of themselves and their bodies, what consequences does that kind of then have? And the same time. So I don't know. Did I cover some ground there?
There were a couple questions about where this happens and does it happen across communities when we're talking about domestic violence. I thought you might want to respond.
You know, so I actually was very thankful that was raised, because a lot of times this does come up. And people even talk about, you know, oh, I want to help these women, you know, and one, it's not just women. And it's not just men either, because people have different ways of that they self-identify. And so we need to be able to even just broaden that conversation, which goes to what you were bringing up about language. And, you know, how does that even just, you know, even with like abuser or victim or perpetrator, you know, with different types of language you choose. I forgot now, see, you already got me off.
No, so
happening across cultures. Okay, yes, and in different communities. And so it definitely does. What you might see are sometimes some differences in terms of the tactics that are used. One that has to do with what resources might be at someone's disposal. So what kind of access do they have to use different sorts of tactics to achieve power and control, and then how will it out them or maybe give them status in the community, depending on, you know, how the culture is and what the sort of expectations are for how people should behave or not. So
give examples.
Different tactics of power and control. Well, in terms of physical assaults, it can be either using violence that will then show so that somebody doesn't want to go to talk to their friends or family, and it can create isolation that way, or purposely assaulting someone where it's not going to show so that they are still able to go and be active in the community so that no one will know that there's this issue that they're hiding or ask them any questions about where they've gone. But it being much more, so using psychological abuse and language to abuse somebody or to make them think that they aren't perceiving reality, you know, in the way that everyone else is, that they must be crazy, how could this have happened to them? Someone's just status in the community can be a barrier. For me, as a domestic violence advocate, I'm expected to not get into a relationship with someone or be able to recognize right away if someone's going to use power and control over me. It's something that it's, you know, the dynamics can happen so subtly and there's different ways. So I may know about my ability to go and make a police report and to get an order of protection. I, you know about support groups that are available where I can go and talk. How safe is it really to be able to go and do that when it's everyone in my community? So that issue that was brought up again about communities, and when do you keep something within your community because there's this pressure to not go outside of your community, or when are times when you need to go outside of your community because you know the community is so tight, maybe because of an issue, some other form of oppression that this community has needed to kind of band together and don't want to bring additional pressure on the community and you know and out you know kind of their secrets. And I'm going in a lot of different places, but it really, I mean, so getting to know on an individual level a certain person will then give you the access, but I think the thing that we need to look at is also how do all of these different forms of oppression, how do we all, are we all affected and how do we suffer from it? But what are the ways in which we also are receiving benefits and privileges? And to really have that examination and to be real with ourselves so that we're not going and preaching to other people, you need to do this and you need to do that, but really looking at our own lives.
It's dying for that question, so, great. Like, oh my God, I don't understand. Well, just between us, if you want to answer something. Okay. It's like dying. I was like, what I wrote down in my notes. Look up stats. So I was really like intrigued by your stat about those here, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So it happening across like different racial and class, like you asking that, like you're wondering, yeah. I think that was a strategy of the movement in terms to normalize violence, to get a critical mass of people involved and showing that it impacts everyone, so we can all be involved. However, I think, and what you spoke about so great too, about like hierarchies of violences in culture, right? Like us, like Americans, you know, just different types of, and that happens like here, right? Like to, what that stat does is not allow like a hierarchy in terms of like, you're more violent than my culture, right? But at the same time, it's so damaging because there is violences that are happening at different disproportions in other communities, just like anything else, just like the criminal system, just like dropout rates, just like cancer, HIV, right? If we took away the fact that like certain communities are disproportionately being affected, what happens is that then you don't have culturally sensitive services available for those groups of people. You don't have funding programs that are available for those people. You have like what Leah was talking about on the west side of Chicago, not engaged in this type of work, right? So it's really important to, so anyway, and that's like the work I'm doing is to like bring those to life, I think in creating culturally sensitive programs and looking at how this is an issue that affects everyone and that that is true. That is very true. And to bring up like the silences in the suburbs, right? Like it looks differently, you know, like, but it's happening in every community. But there are certain communities that's happening more of because of what we know is that different intersections of violences or the vulnerable factor is increased. So what we do know about sexual assault is that if a community, what perpetrators look for is who's more vulnerable, right? And so women are more vulnerable, girls are more vulnerable, people who are at the intersections of like poverty and, you know, are more vulnerable, you know, so it's looking at all those intersections. And I just have some stats. So there's a report that was done, I think it was in 2012, by Black Women's Blueprints. It's an organization in New York City that focuses on Black women's stories about sexual violence and domestic violence. And they interviewed 300 people in their survey, 300 girls specifically under the age of 18, and 60% of those girls experience sexual assault, right? So 60%. There's like star rate that's like more than what we know. And so there's also a new study that's going on by African American Policy Forum. You know about, oh yeah, everybody knows, okay. Right, so looking at, and they're coming out with like the status of Black girls pretty soon. And I think that allows us to talk about the work differently and allow services to look differently for certain populations. And you could go down different ethnic groups and look at these things differently. But it's important to really talk about what are the differences so we can really figure out the best techniques of healing and also like criminal justice systems that may look like we'd have more diverse systems that look best for ending violence against women and girls.
One of the things that I got propelled into was that I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish community, up until about, I'd say, 8 years ago or so, nobody believed that Jews were violent, that they weren't better, they weren't men who were better, there weren't women getting better, there weren't children getting incest. That just doesn't happen here. And it's been fascinating because that has broken down by a lot of work from a lot of people. And it wasn't surprising to me, but the statistics are extremely high. But there was extraordinary silence because it was completely socially unacceptable to admit that it could possibly happen. And certainly in the Orthodox community, they couldn't go to shelters because you need to eat kosher food and you have to have a mezuzah on your doorpost and you can't leave. So there are many cultures that have those kinds of things that, in addition to social approbation, just resist recognizing. And that's even more problematic because then there's nowhere to turn, there's no help to get. And I've seen this happen in the East Asian community. In many communities, there's initially resistance. You know, don't have our dirty laundry out there. That happened to Alice Walker when Alice Walker wrote The Color Purple. She was demonized by her community because they did not want. It's just that it is really happening everywhere. And I don't think we'll ever exactly know how much of it is happening because most people will never report it. When I ran women's services at the YW a millennia ago, I'd say 9 out of 10 women who came to get help from us, to get counseling, to have somewhere to talk, had never reported it, would never report it. And some of that was wise because at that point the police wouldn't have been helpful. They would have blamed them too. There are more recourses, there is new legislation, but we kid ourselves to think that there isn't victim blaming. But also, it's very hard to prosecute. And then there's, in many communities, the question of why do we put more of our community in jail? Prisons aren't going to heal anybody. Often they're victims too. They've been taught that to be a man, you have to be rough and tough and control. And they've had no ability to figure, well, not necessarily no ability, but there are often there aren't a lot of places for men in our culture, period, to really express more than anger. There's sort of anger and sex, you get to do those two things. But, you know, all the tones of tenderness and caring and or irritation and frustration, all of those different things are often difficult for men to really access. So they end up lumping them all up into anger and using anger as the way to express themselves. And that's a pity, but it's common to many cultures. And it locks, I think, men into very limited behaviors. And one of the things that I'm really interested in, I'm not sure, someone talked about prevention. We've talked a lot about young women being asked to prevent by what they wear and who they talk to, et cetera, which is misguided. What we don't talk enough in terms of prevention in this culture is talking to young men so that they talk to other young men about not behaving this way. So that the jokes that go on in the locker room, that the permission that happens on teams, that the coaches who turn a blind eye to the young men under their care, that they stop each other, that they begin to say, you know what, we don't want to live in a world where all of our sisters and mothers and daughters are afraid. And what can we do? And there are, in fact, bystander groups now where they're challenging young men to use their courage and their power to not offend somebody, but in fact to stop somebody near them from offending. Because there are many, most men would never be harmful to anyone else, but they don't step up and stop them. Otherwise there'd be a lot less of this. So one of the challenges is, how do we motivate and encourage men to realize it's their problem too? This is not just a women's problem and a girl's problem. This has to be a community problem, and this has to be men's problems. And so men of conscience really need to figure out how in their life, whether with their children or with their coworkers or with their neighbors, how do they step up? And when there are rape jokes and if you can't beat your wife, who can you beat jokes? And you know, to stop those and say, you know, that isn't funny, and let's talk about what that means. And I don't think it's necessarily a stretch. And I'm going to tell you one story, and I'm going to pass this on to somebody else. In raising I have two sons, and one of them was in high school and wanted to go to unsupervised parties. And he, being a sweetheart and not prone to lying, came and asked me his permission, my permission, to let him go to unsupervised parties. And he said everybody else pretends they're going and sleeping over at somebody's house, and then they all go to the party. But I actually want you to know, and I want you to give me your blessing. And I couldn't, and I realized it wasn't that I was so scared that he was going to drink or experiment with marijuana or something like that, because for sure they will. You know, they're adolescents in 20, whatever. He's 27 now, so it's not 2014, but you know, that wasn't what I was worried about. I trusted him. I knew that he would never harm somebody personally, because he's a deep and empathic and dear human being, and he's my son, and he's gotten Feminism 101 through graduate school and in my home. But I knew that he wouldn't be able to stop somebody else. And that one of these parties, some young woman who would get led upstairs if she was maybe intoxicated or didn't really understand what was happening, or just really liked somebody but didn't intend it to go that far, any of those things, that could happen, and I couldn't bear for him to be there and not be able to stop it. And we did a lot of thinking about that. How could he stop it? You know, this little guy. Well, he convinced me that he had you know, a plan, and he would get a group of his friends together, and that they would stop this. And we had numerous talks, and finally, I let him go. And then, I'd say his senior year, just before graduation, he came to me later and said, Mom, you know that discussion we once had about going to parties? And I said, for sure, I remember. And he said, well, I did it. I said, what did you do? And he said, well, I saw a friend, he never told me who, I never asked, and she was pretty drunk. She'd had a lot of beer, and I don't know what else, but she wasn't really aware of what was going on, and she was being led upstairs, and there were 5 guys following the guy that had her by the wrist, taking her up to a bedroom. And I ran up the stairs on the side of them, and I started yelling at them and telling them, I won't say this because I just realized it's on camera, but he swore at them, and he took her hand and took her downstairs and took her into his car, got her best friend, and drove her home, and with her best friend. And I'd say within a week, I think 4 of his friends who were girls came up to me and said, thank you, Barbara. You can't believe how proud you should be of your son, Aaron. He really did save somebody. So we could teach all of our good young men to do that. They could be interveners on the spot. They know what's happening. They're at those parties, they're out on the street, they're in people's homes. And if the young men around understood that it's not good enough just not to do it yourself, it's what you really need to do is help make an environment where it can't happen. I think we need to do that. And that's one of the kinds of prevention I'd really like to see.
But I want to thank you all very much for being here, sharing your stories.
Is it nighttime?
No, it's not, but I have to leave early. And I just wanted to say thank you again for our opportunity. Thank you.
As a society, we, in general terms, we talk about rape of men against women, and one of the things that cannot be ignored is the fact that one of the most vulnerable individuals, are within the LGBT communities, not just physical but also sexual, and specifically trans kids, adults are violently attacked, in various forms, and we can't ignore that. I mean, violence is pervasive, it's not just in any particular area. I mean, war uses rape as a weapon.
Yes, thank you.
And
Just on that, I just want to jump in and add, because it's a very important point that, I have a lot of people who haven't necessarily looked at a lot of different issues, but maybe they personally have some experience with domestic violence specifically, and so they come in to volunteer and they're wanting to address the issue of domestic violence, but maybe they don't understand how these other attitudes affect, something that they don't feel like anyone should be assaulted, but to understand how immigration policies, homophobia, racism, all affects the vulnerability that some women can experience in their home violence.
I was just going to ask your opinion about, do you want me to use it? Yes. What's the impact of porn? Porn is so available, and all kids watch it, and people watch it, and it really, I think it encourages hatred against women and violence against women. And what's your opinion of how to stop it, and what can be done?
Does anybody want to say anything on this?
Well, but I think that the issue with porn is also about accessibility of porn. That porn is much more accessible, but it has been accessible in a lot of ways kind of previously. There is some research that suggests that pornography has become increasingly violent towards women, and that violence is kind of celebrated and legitimized in porn. There are also feminists who make pornography and who see feminist porn as a way of taking back sexual agency and celebration of sexuality. So I think that porn overall is probably a little bit more complicated, but I think kind of when you're talking about mass market pornography and that is becoming increasingly even kind of more available, that there does seem to be a trend towards more violence being depicted within pornography. And there are people who do work on porn who have suggested that there is a connection between the increasing violence in pornography and kind of what we see. I think the important thing is that that's not divorced from how we see violence against women in video games, like what Barbara mentioned, or violence against women that we may see in television shows. Like there's been some interesting discussion about the fact that rape has often been used as character development or in place of character development for female characters on TV and movies. That, you know, if things are getting a little stale in the plot, then, you know, have a favored female character get raped, and that the nuances and the complexities of all of what you've all kind of brought to this conversation don't get brought into that quote-unquote character development. And that it's a very limited trajectory of like character development for female characters. So the reason I bring that up kind of in the conversation about, or to your question about porn, is that it's that none of this is isolated. You know, none of these are like single variables that if we just got rid of that, then we would be able to kind of disarm rape culture. That it's kind of supported, kind of layer upon layer upon layer. I mean, even our conversations about kind of who's vulnerable, for example, how that conversation gets kind of twisted is in that it's something about the victim that is causing the assault. And that perhaps one of the ways to think of it is that it's not so much that race is a vulnerability, but that racism is a vulnerability. And that it's not so much that being transgender is a vulnerability, but transphobia that is the vulnerability, right? So it's about kind of how does our society view and create status based on that view of a person that makes them vulnerable. Not something about them that is inherently less than or inherently weak. And I think, you know, porn may be an area where you can kind of talk about that too. I've been in conversations with people who are very passionate about the idea of feminist pornography, and I think have a lot to contribute to the conversation overall about porn. But overall, mass market porn has become pretty violent.
I have assumptions of superiority, you know.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when we're talking about actual vulnerability or perceptions of vulnerability, but then again, what is this? Going back to the question about what is it? What are things that people are learning about the other gender or about whatever, not just what are they learning about themselves? So.
So as a millennial, there's not really any stopping the internet. The internet there's always going to be something horrible out there. So I think really what is going to change things is not taking down porn from all the websites. Like that's, you know, they're so sticky, you know, like with, you know, amendments and, you know, rights, freedom of speech, whatever. So I think a much better place to look, you know, is the home. You know, I was so impressed with your son for having, you know, and you for having that open dialogue. And I think it's really important that, you know, men shouldn't be ashamed of even just claiming themselves as feminists, because it's like this thing that, oh, I'm a dude, I can't be a feminist. Or like, you know, even just like the word feminazi, like it's so used, like, you know, like it's so used. It's like, oh, you wanna respect yourself and fight for your rights, so she must be a feminazi. So I think it's much more in education, and you know, it was really touching to hear your story, because I wish my father and mother had told that story to my father. You know, like I wish, because you know, again, it's a cycle. You know, there's a reason why this is happening over ages and ages and ages, because it's being passed down. It's something. It's not like the Big Bang Theory. It's not like it came out of nowhere. You know, it's something that's been like brought down from generations and generations. And you know, for me personally, part of my healing process has been, and I know I have the luxury to do this, and not everyone does, but it's to sort of confront it in a non-aggressive way. I confronted my dad, and I had an open conversation, and I told him directly how he made me feel, and you know, just sort of like through this conversation, I validated my experience and my my past, and you know, and it's just, I think family is where it really does come down to, because that's you know, you're brought up, so much of who you are is determined by what your environment is as a young person, because as a young person you're at this stage in your life where you're like a sponge, you just like take in everything. And I think being able to sort of confront that, not aggressively again, like in a very sort of like open space, is where problems can really be solved. And I don't know, yeah, I think, and then through that, porn will be less effective, I guess, in sort of instilling these ideas of masculinity and femininity. Yeah.
Camille, did you want to say something? Somebody also brought up, like, who isn't here, and how do we move discussions into, or not we, I mean, how do communities sponsor discussions like this, or like whatever else they make on a Monday evening. I actually think that one of the differences I've seen is that there are many more of these kinds of things happening. There are support groups, but there are also just people talking about hard issues in communities in many different ways. And sometimes it's still around a kitchen table, but sometimes it's a community forum. And I've been gratified that it's happening more, and I'm also gratified that what was seen as the women's movement has really broadened, and that the leadership are women obviously, or people who identify as women, taking a lot of leadership from every community. One of the ways that I know Camellia, for instance, is that quite a while ago, we were working on domestic violence in the Arab community. And we've ended up talking about Israel and Palestine and many other extraordinarily hard and important issues that have everything to do also with oppression. And so there have been lots of, and so there's stuff going on there. I know that you're working with young African American girls. I know that Apnagar, was one of the first Southeast Asian shelters, and I happen to have the privilege of being part of the Chicago Foundation for Women, and I chaired allocation and we gave them the first grant to start Abnagar and to really encourage and support what was clear leadership in that community to address violence. So I think nothing's perfect, but I do think that there is more discussion, and there's certainly leadership by women of color all over this movement. In fact, the most exciting work, insight and a number of things that both of you are extremely involved in. I'm only jealous that I can't go. But there's really, I think it's changed enormously and is both more representative and more real and more powerful as a result. But if there's a criticism that we need to hear, I'd love to hear more. I don't remember who it was.
I would like to say something. I don't know if you noticed, people, but we're sitting here, I think, almost 2 hours and a half, and it seems magically as if it's happened like, 5 minutes. And it's something about the space, I think the integrity of the space, and you ladies, and how you created a safe space in spite of the TV, and how the TV also interrupted so
totally forgot about it.
Beautifully together. Each one of us was giving that. Each one of you can. So much, was given here with so much integrity and strength. And if there is any criticism or suggestion, is something that I'm now opening for LSE, which used to, that I'm surprising. Why not to do this conversation more? Every month, for example, right? When we say to start a movement, we can really start a movement, because what is happening is that we create something, it's created fact, and then it disappears. So how to keep momentum? And LSE doesn't know that yet, but volunteer the space once a month for us to continue, and mostly to continue, with this momentum. And this beautiful conversation that luckily was documented in spite of everything.
In spite of me saying, a TV, we don't want a TV. But I know that you wanted to say something.
Yeah. I wanted to address the last point because I just realized I could connect with it. I'm someone who rides across different communities. I teach yoga and I teach private yoga lessons, which really serves an elite group that can do that. And at the same time, I've really become an activist and just greater awareness. And I've put myself in a lot of different groups to kind of increase what I understand and know. And I feel very privileged and honored to kind of have a little bit of that. And what I've found myself, because I'm coming forward from with some radical viewpoints as I educate myself more, and then these things come out with some of my students who are, their husband owns a stockbroker. There's some people who are in these different places that I'm working with, and things come out here and there. But what I've realized through my dialogue, I talk to the people I'm with in general, is that there's truth in everywhere, and that's true. But in terms of this last piece, why aren't there more conversations, or how can we create a conversation like this? I didn't hear exactly the west side, what you were saying. And then I hear over here from Barbara, I'm hearing there is so much more than there used to be. I'm seeing so much optimism and community and talking about this. And both of these things are true. And I think as we move forward, the truth is that things are getting better and dialogue is increasing and people are becoming more well-educated around issues. And then what is also true is that there are some people not getting served by these conversations, And so I just wanted to give some kind of voice based on what I've experienced regarding that.
Can I throw something out there? Actually, I don't actually need the mic.
It's for the, it's not me.
Oh, okay.
It's actually not, it's not a microphone for us, that's why you guys have to speak up.
Yeah,
It's just for the camera.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to shout out that I mean, it could on one hand be that every, generation feels as though they're on like the cusp of a revolution or the cusp of something.
We are.
Damn straight, girl. I mean, it could just be that, but I also do feel that, like, as you were saying, like emotional intelligence and the ability to be able to create spaces of dialogue and talk about things like consent and articulate boundaries and articulate like the sort of like nuanced nitty gritty spectrum that is, I guess like emotional comfort zones and like the emotional experience of being a human within a society. That articulating things like that is becoming more and more important and more the focus of, I don't know, growing up or a process of education. It's become a thing that we recognize, that people teach their children to do these things, and these things are hopefully being like integrated a little bit more into schools, and that there's this like newfound focus on articulating like the experience of being a human in any time that like discomfort arises. And I think that this is kind of new. I feel like this is something that's been coming up, has been happening for decades and decades, but has like, that we are kind of on the cusp of at least like a revolutionary period in emotional intelligence, that people feel the need to talk about this. I think that's good. Well, here.
I really don't want to answer my own question.
You can another question.
Yeah, I guess, and I'll direct it to Scheherazade and Charmaine. I'll just direct it to you, and then whoever kind of wants to jump in. This is what I do. But so I recognize that there are people in their own communities doing things in their own communities. And I'm definitely not advocating the kind of outsider come in and implant something without being aware and responsible about like who you are and your power and influence and all those things. But I'm also very aware of like what this space is. It's a gallery, and there are images that are created by women who have access to artists, to work individually with artists and to put their work on these walls. And I think the artwork is also for sale. I don't know, no, maybe not. I saw prices. But I mean, this is not a critique of those things, and me saying that they're bad, but I'm just pointing out my awareness of this space and pointing out my awareness of what's happening here. And asking questions about how, like, are these things happening elsewhere? How are they happening elsewhere? What things are missing, and how can we be more inclusive in our advocacy work?
That element of awareness, is being expressed within the arts community. I think the very fact that we have stories, sort of adds to that, And Barbara, you mentioned, dialogue on a variety of, quote, difficult issues, is healthy and, needs to be continued. And there's a small group out of Evanston that has been running untold stories dealing with personal issues of Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank, the Jews who are living in the cloistered Israeli environment, and this has been going on for a while, so this is out in the open, and it's a healthy, continuing, not just individual expression, but it's an expanded expression.
Just a quick remark here. We have actually two exhibitions going on. One is an open call for entry, of artists. The other part is exhibition that was done with residents in a domestic violence shelter, which we work together with them, some of the artists here. So this is just, in terms of, the details of what is the space that we're sitting at. I think it's important.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I mean, I'm also wanting to engage with the space a bit more.
Regardless of the space, it's the content that this conversation can be continued in any steps, I think.
I mean,
in any exhibition,
it's
as going on, and in any place.
Yes,
because it is issue that goes on when life goes on. So, the idea is to continue and talk regardless of changes.
Yes, I agree with you that this conversation of content is important. I just want to, I think it goes to the previous question about things happening across race, class, gender, or nationality. I think it goes to the specificity of that and how, refining resources, looking at, just kind of enhancing our eye, the way that we look when we have these discussions, if that makes sense.
I just want to say something that when you engage something like the aesthetics, which is like the highest form of engaging in philosophy, history, everything in our society that is good, when you engage that part of any society, you can start bringing change because visual is our main force. It's not about privilege and it's not about the prices.
I don't think that's what I'm saying, but
okay, I don't know about help, but I kind of understand what is happening a little bit. So I just came back from New York City for a strategic planning meeting about how we could strategically build a movement against violence against women. Strategically, 2 things hardcore. One of the exercises that we did was about awareness. So I had to, it was me and another executive director, and we closed our eyes, and we had to write down 5 things, what we saw around us. We had to look up. Oh, actually, we close our eyes and we open them, and then write 5 things, because we're looking at the same direction, right? What's interesting is that we didn't write down the same things, right? I wrote down, one was similar. One was, I wrote down, wow, this is pretty amazing, how diverse it was. The room was so diverse. And she wrote down women. And she said that it's really interesting that I wrote down diversity, maybe because she's in New York and she sees diversity all the time. And I was like, I'm sure she sees women too, right? She wrote that, but that was a reason why she wrote that down. So perception is really interesting because, I didn't even think that, I think we think the same things, but we really don't. We see things differently. So anytime I do a talk, scan, who's here, okay, am I talking to, a good group of people? Am I talking to the same crowd? Am I talking to a diverse crowd? Am I talking to men? Am I talking to women? Who's not in the room? Who's in the room? That is something, my identity, my cause, that's what leads me continuously doing the work, I noticed that my population, 16 to 24 that I work with, which is 4 times more likely to experience gender-based violence, isn't in the room. And I actually was going to bring 10 wonderful high school students with me today on a field trip from the West Side, but because I was so sick, I decided to cancel it, right? I decided to do my own self-care and that. They literally go everywhere I go. They go to the fundraisers. They go to yoga. They go to yoga. This is all strategic. This is my strategic plan. Actually, this is very. It's about. They just actually did my keynote in Evanston at the Women's Center for International Women's Center. Women's Day. I'm sorry, at the International Women's Day, which was wonderful. They. So allowing giving access, opening doors, but my thing is building a leader, right? It's giving help and all these different things, but it's actually giving resources that doesn't exist in the community and thinking strategically about, like, I really want this program that I would call Girlfriends to be run by them in 9 years. I know that just can't be alone with, like, the type of direct services. It has to be done with, like, taking them feeling comfortable. They're going to be in this gallery. They make art. That's how they make change. But galleries aren't in their communities, right? So it would be like exposing them to something different and a new way of looking at things, and like so they can actually bring these tools back into their community. So I mean, it's just I think how we look at things and how we. But you know, my thing would be, and it was wonderful that was like an all-purpose cause. How I would change that would be like, how can we partner up with people to do outreach to those communities? Or how can I help, how can, you know, we help bring your skills to the community without owning or taking ownership of them, but like, you know, giving them access to spaces and door openings, and in just a different kind of way. I think that's kind of one of the strategies.
So you have a proposal for one of the next months, you know,
Yeah.
the next year for a youth-led exhibition. I know, actually, I do want to speak that I know Camellia, who has spent a lot of her life on the Southwest side working with primarily African American and Arab youth, had an amazing thing, wasn't it here? It was here where people were doing hip hop and people, oh, it was with you, Grenita, it was your program. It was extraordinarily, and so some of it is, you know, harnessing whatever spaces we can get and then finding other spaces in communities too. But I do believe that this place has had some track record, certainly more than any gallery I've been, although I don't frequent a lot of galleries. But I do think that that's a really good idea, and maybe something when you talk about how to continue, maybe that's one of the things that will continue, is having some of the artists here work with, and fine artists in other communities to work with young kids. And I know people are doing it, that wonderful muralist, not muralist, she makes mosaics, Carol Ellen. If you live in the South Side, under the underpasses, are these dazzling and beautiful mosaics that an African-American woman artist and the communities that she's in make these things that I can't believe are enduring Chicago weather, and they're stunning. Try the 47th Street exit onto the outer drive, but I think there are artists in every community, and that might be something to go forward when we think about healing and developing leaders and art and social change. But we're really near the end of our time. I love that we threw all things up in the air and waited to see where they fell. It's trust in groups, and I think all of us made this a very interesting conversation, not one that we could ever have plotted ahead of time. But I really want to thank everybody. But before we go, there are 2 body worker yoga people. And I just want to say that one of the things that I didn't know and we didn't know when we started doing work with women or anybody who's victims of violence, we didn't fully understand how much is kept in your body and how critical body work is to really frame yourself, to repossess yourself after violence. And so you have incredible tools. And I would bet the shelter that she works at, that the shelter that Grenita has worked with, that your program would love if you would have a day where you would provide either both people getting massages and learning how to massage, so that it's not just one way. But I do think that there's a huge need, and if you have any pro bono time, I bet I could find a half a dozen organizations who would love to have you work with people who participate in their programs and are carrying around all kinds of fear and pain. And the last thing I want to say is that I don't want us to lose the fact that this is family and it is interpersonal, but it is also a socio-cultural thing that we're dealing with. And that in order to really have these changes, we really have to remember both to work close at hand and also see the really big picture. And then maybe if we continue this conversation, we'll do even more emphasis on that. And I thank you. And I am, one of the ways Ramit and Miriam and I are connected is that we are involved in an Arab-Jewish partnership. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say other than, I can't thank you enough and how exciting and how odd and how wonderful this evening has been. What?
We've touched a couple of times on the role of men or male-identified folks in addressing gender-based violence, so I just wanted to make a quick plug that Rape Victim Advocates is hosting a discussion series called Men in the Movement, and it's open to anyone. You don't have to be male-identified, but it is focused around kind of how men and male-identified people can be involved in the gender-based violence, anti-gender-based violence movement, as people who may have been survivors themselves, witnesses, or otherwise. And the next one's March 26th, and our Facebook page is a lovely font of information about all things RBA. So I know that's one thing coming up, and I certainly would be remiss if I didn't mention that April was Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Mention it for both of us.
So both the Long Walk Home and Rape Victim Advocates will have like a series of events, but one I think that ties some of what we've been talking about here together is we have one evening called Breaking the Silence, which is a poetry night, which has both featured poets, and we're going to be featuring poets who are part of the Surviving the Mic workshop series, which is specific to Black women who do spoken word and poetry, and what their experiences of sexual violence have been, and kind of how they're coming together to address that.
And thank you all for coming and participating.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.